When you think of the space race, you probably think about Houston, or maybe Cape Canaveral. But less discussed is Alabama's role in man leaving its home behind. Because if it weren't for Huntsville, Alabama, mankind may have never reached the stars. So today we're going to talk about the unsung heroes of the space race. Not the astronauts or command, but those who built the incredible machines that helped mankind reach the heavens. Before it was known as the Rocket City, Huntsville was an ordnance town. During World War II, Huntsville was home to 3 separate arsenals that manufactured and stored weapons due to its proximity to major railroads and rivers. When the war ended, these facilities were consolidated into what is now known as Redstone Arsenal. But we're not quite there yet. Let's take a look across the pond at Germany during the war. There, a scientist named Wernher von Braun was working on rockets, but not just any rockets. The V-2 rocket, a missile, one of the first of its kind, commissioned by Adolf Hitler in an effort to change the face of warfare forever. Fortunately for us, progress on this missile was not completed in a timely enough manner, and Germany started losing the war badly. The scientists behind the V-2 project were justifiably worried that they might be executed to keep secrets from getting into enemy hands. So they had 2 choices: get captured by the Russians or surrender to the US. They chose the latter. Thus began Operation Paperclip, an initiative meant to scoop up thousands of German scientists and put them to work for the United States. Werner and his team were assigned to create missiles for the US, first being assigned to Fort Bliss in Texas before being assigned to the newly formed Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Now, before we move on, let's address the elephant in the room. Wernher von Braun claimed that his participation in the Nazi war effort was not an ideological one. According to him, designing missiles was just a way to research rocket technology in order to achieve his true dream: space travel. We cannot ultimately know the conscience of the man or the men who worked with him, but we do know that this passion for space travel was real. This passion continued into his tenure at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. He proposed in 1954 that the boosters that he had designed could be used to launch satellites into space. This research was greenlit, and this began the Jupiter series of rockets. The Jupiter was capable, performing exceptionally in test flights. However, at the last moment, the satellite launch mission was given to the Navy's rocket program. That is, until the Soviets launched Sputnik. Suddenly, the space race was on and America was behind. That very night, there was a reception at Redstone Arsenal, and in attendance was Neil McElroy, the soon-to-be Secretary of Defense. Wernher von Braun approached the man and said, "Mr. Secretary, when you get back to Washington, you'll find that all hell has broken loose. We can put up a satellite in 60 days once you give us the go-ahead." Werner's superior, Major General John B. Medeiros, overheard this statement and said, "Make it 90 days.
I'm standing on a launching pad at Cape Canaveral. Behind me is a Juno 2 missile, a modified Jupiter. Sometime tomorrow, come rain or shine, this missile will attempt to loft a satellite weighing more than 90 pounds and put it into orbit."
On January 31st, 1958, 119 days later, the Jupiter C, also known as the Juno 1, launched, successfully deploying the Explorer 1 satellite into orbit. The space race was on. President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, forming the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA. Wernher von Braun and his team were reluctantly phased into NASA, even though they were reluctant to leave their old posts at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency behind. The Redstone Arsenal was converted into the Marshall Space Flight Center, which became the hub for NASA's technological breakthroughs. Von Braun was named its director. Now, the majority of the most notable names that came out of the Marshall Space Flight Center were those same scientists from Project Paperclip. But make no mistake, the minds at Marshall were a diverse crew from all across the country and the globe. One Alabama-born and bred employee and engineer stated that it was strange working with people in Alabama who weren't interested when you brought up Alabama football. This diverse array of people helped form the culture of Huntsville, Alabama. This team of bright minds had a new mission: Project Mercury. Their goal was to develop a new rocket that would take a manned capsule up into space. However, in the process of testing the Mercury rockets, the Soviets beat us to the punch, successfully launching one of their astronauts into space before we had the opportunity. On May 1st, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American astronaut to leave our atmosphere behind and to visit outer space. So the next challenge presented itself: the moon. To accomplish this feat, the engineers at Marshall started to design the Saturn series of rockets. They were the most powerful rockets ever built at the time, and to date, the Saturn V is still the largest and most powerful rocket ever created. It is also the only series of rockets with a 100% success rate. On July 16, 1969, that Saturn V rocket successfully launched 3 men all the way to the moon. The Saturns would continue to launch the Apollo missions over the next decade. But the Marshall Space Flight Center's accomplishments did not end with the Apollo program. Its role in space exploration was only just beginning. At Marshall, the lunar buggy was invented to help astronauts explore the moon more efficiently. In the 80s, the Space Shuttle was invented, the most complicated spacecraft ever created. There at Marshall, the Hubble telescope was designed and created, allowing us to catch glimpses of the cosmos we had never seen before. And even though the International Space Station is an international collaboration, much of the US orbital section was created in Huntsville, and the Marshall Space Flight Center continues to innovate to this day. In fact, if you were to take an inventory of all of the man-made objects in space, most of them came from Alabama, of all places. Because Huntsville, Alabama wasn't merely instrumental in getting us to outer space. It's where the instruments were made. Huntsville, Alabama is where the legwork happened. Huntsville was and is the hub of America's journey into the cosmos. So next time you think about Alabama, maybe don't think about football or NASCAR or stereotypes about rednecks, and instead remember that this is where rockets come from. One of the most popular songs about Alabama is Stars Fell on Alabama, which I've always felt was fitting, considering the fact that Alabama is a large part of the reason that we reached the stars.